Hey everyone, welcome to WTF Is Up. I'm your co-host Jeremy,
And I'm Omar.
and we're two dads, entrepreneurs, former tech people, basically folks who want to support your success at every step of your journey, from finding the perfect career to building a life worth living. Every single episode, as you know, we're going to tell you WTF is up, but also WTF you can actually do about it, unlike so many other podcasts out there. Now, in our first couple episodes, we've been talking about AI in the job market. We've been talking about where college heads in 2025. Today, we're going to bring all those things together in one mega episode that is near and dear to our hearts, which is AI and parenting. And so, to get us really started here in true WTF is up fashion, because we are two dads, Omar, would you bless this podcast with a beautiful dad joke?
All right. Well, true to the topic, I asked a few large language models to come up with a dad joke about parenting and AI. And you tell me which one you like best. So, Jeremy, here's what ChatGPT came up with. I asked AI to help me parent. Now my toddler gets a performance review after every tantrum. That's pretty
Interesting.
good. Common
Is
use case for
AI turning
AI.
us into like the corporate board or something? I like
Yes.
that. Okay.
Common use case for AI, performance reviews.
Yes.
Okay. So that one wasn't bad. Claude came up with this one. Why did the AI refuse to babysit?
Why?
Because it kept trying to debug the kids instead of putting them to bed.
Mm, I heard that Claude was supposed to be a great writer, but maybe he should stick to fiction.
Totally.
Ouch.
Or STEM, right? Like coding.
Yeah.
Google Gemini is our last one. Why did the AI get grounded?
Why?
Because it kept telling its parents, I'm not sleeping, I'm just in low power mode.
What?
I mean, that is
Oh my
bad.
God. That tells you everything you need to know about Google today.
Some things that humans and perhaps dads can still do
Yes.
better.
Yeah.
So those are our dad jokes for today. Sorry they weren't all good. And we're going to
No.
solve this problem of AI and parenting
Yeah.
today in this
I think
episode, right?
that's the perfect place to start, which is that like we're in this murky middle right now. You know, who someday maybe AI will be parenting our kids for us, but until that day arrives when it can really nail the dad joke genre, we're still gonna have one hand on the wheel.
Lay the table for us and tell us what some of the pros and cons and just what's going on with this
Yeah, so we're gonna
crazy
spend a
space.
lot of time on the dark side of AI and parenting. However, before we go there, I'd love to share some of my personal greatest hits when it comes to AI and being a dad. And I'd love to hear the
Hit
same
us,
from you,
man.
Omar, if you have any of those.
Hit us. You're in
Um,
Silicon Valley. Hit us.
Yeah. And so here's the thing. I think that so much of what drives people crazy about modern parenting is not just that it's hard and we're disconnected from our families and it's all this sort of baggage that we carry as 21st century, but there's a limit on the amount of imagination and creativity that we can bring, especially when we're burned out from our jobs and everything else. And so I look at AI not so much as solving education for our kids or being the solution for their future employment, but instead giving us that little spark of energy and imagination right when we need it. I got to tell you, Omar, as someone who walks his kids,
Parent?
yes, co-parent, as someone who walks his kids to school, you know, old school style every morning, there is nothing as tedious as this like boring, monotonous walk where I'm asking like, what happened at school yesterday? And no one's saying anything. And as soon as AI came out a couple years ago, and I started saying, what are 10 would you rather questions that I can ask the kids? What are 10 trivia questions I can ask about what they just learned in social studies yesterday? And I turned our morning walk into almost like a game show. All of a sudden, I felt like, hey, this really is my co parent, not in a broad sense, but at the specific moment of pain when the caffeine is not kicked in yet and I need that extra burst of creativity. So that's where I'm loving AI as a parent. What about you, Omar? Are there any upside you're seeing?
That's so interesting. We have co-pilot, we need co-parent. So
Yes.
that's a good suggestion for talking to your kids, right? Um, I hadn't thought of that. So I'll just start by saying like we are pro tech, right? We both spent a long time working in tech. I helped launch iPad for education. Sometimes I carry some guilt about that. But my daughter, who I've not used AI with, nor has she really been directly exposed to it. She's 13, so I think a year older than your daughter, right? I asked her what AI is, and she said, yeah, I don't really know, but it's robots who are taking over the world, right? and they're way smarter than humans. This is what she said. And I was like, well, it's like online tools where you can actually like create stuff. Like you're not going to have to like create a video or write an essay because you can just tell it to do that. And she said, like Grammarly. And I was like, well, okay. Anyway, so I was explaining a little more. She said, that makes sense because humans are lazy. These are 13-year-old insights, which I thought were pretty spot on.
Yes.
Humans are
Nailed it.
lazy. So we created tools to do things for us, right? And in the future, we're all going to be fat couch potatoes who don't do anything, and we're going to die sooner because we're not going to be social anymore, and our best friends are going to be ChatGPT, and people will commit suicide at greater rates because the things that it says to them aren't nice. I didn't tee her up for any of this doomsday stuff. So my answer to how I'm using AI with my kid is I am not at all. Now, convince me that I should be and give me more examples like the one you started with.
Did Amaya watch Wally last night by any chance?
I
I feel like
know
that's the darkest Disney movie of all time.
it's exactly that dystopian vision.
Yeah.
And again, with no prompting, this is what she came up with. And I think part of it is we have a loneliness epidemic, right? This is true for kids too. So is this going to further exacerbate that?
Yeah, good question. So let me paint an even bigger, brighter picture beyond just dad jokes and walk to school conversations. I think the real dystopian future, at least the way that I see it out here in Silicon Valley, is when my kids were young, before AI was out, there was all this obsession with like, you got to go to Kumon, you got to go to Russian School of Math, you got to learn to code. And it was so depressing because here were these super smart people who were reducing their kids to like little cogs in an engineering machine. And I feel like the upside of AI is all of a sudden, I feel like the coding schools can go out of business. Math is not as important because I can win the like international math Olympiad gold medal all of a sudden. And it could actually free our kids up to do the stuff they're excited about. Like if you want to build a business, if you want to build a website, if you want to create videos that tell your story about, paleontology in Latin America, whatever your personal passion is, you can now do that without having to go through those gauntlets that I just alluded to. And so again, it's a little bit like pulling teeth right now for some of our kids because they're not necessarily at that stage of being able to really see that big vision for their lives. But I do think that is the really nice upside if that comes to fruition. But what's your take there, Omar? Is that Pollyannish, or is there something really there?
No, that's really interesting. It's the general promise of AI for greater productivity, for lowering the barriers to actually getting shit done, right? As applied to kids and to the learning process. We're old enough to remember, Jeremy, when like Google started and smartphones first came out, right? And we were working in education at the time. I remember everyone questioning what is going to happen with kids now? What literally is the role of educators and parents and school systems? Education being an important part of raising kids, not the only part, right? So we can talk about some of the other elements. But everyone was like, well, all the knowledge that they need is right there and Googleable now, right? What are teachers and parents going to do, right, in this world? And we figured it out, right? Now, that said, we do have to acknowledge the part of my daughter's sentiment that is true for people and true for many, many kids, which is this part about humans being lazy, humans liking to take shortcuts, right? Learning new things, especially, is hard. It requires a lot of work. And I thought there was an interview with a Brookings researcher, Rebecca Winthrop, that I thought was really interesting. She was on Ezra Klein's show recently, and she was talking about the different learning modes that kids get into. One of them that's most pronounced and increasingly prevalent being passenger mode, right? This idea that
Yes.
you're like along for the ride, and how these tools could further amplify that. What are your thoughts on that, and sort of like making sure that both in their personal and educational lives, kids still have agency in the lives they're creating, in the interests that they're cultivating, and not just outsourcing it to a bot? Now, that's not going to be equally possible for every kid, right? But how do we make sure that kids still feel that?
Yeah. So this is so important because going back to our topic last week around, with higher education in the future, I think as education is currently constructed in our society, both K through 12 and higher ed, so much of the struggle and the engagement that drives the growth of that sort of learning and ambition muscle comes from the academic work. you've got to put together this 5-page essay, you've got to do the research, you've got to format it really beautifully. And if you can now do that with the click of a button in an undetectable way to your teacher or your professor, now you're not really building any of those muscles. Your daughter is totally right, Omar. Laziness triumphs. And so I guess the question is like the dark side of AI as a parent is, are my kids going to basically skate through the rest of education without really having that productive struggle, without growing those muscles? Or will education potentially change where education says, hey, we now know that these academic exclusive projects are no longer sufficient. We know that having people write essays is not going to get the job done. So instead, we're going to throw even more hairy challenges at them. We're going to say every high school student has to start a nonprofit before they graduate. Every college student has to start a business before they graduate. Because even if you use AI, you're going to still have to draw upon these meta skills and these perseverance skills to get on through because the bar is so much higher. I feel like if we could do that, now I'm actually even more excited about my kids' futures because they're going to be able to grow in ways that we could never have anticipated when we were their age. What's your take there? Is that realistic?
Yeah, that's really exciting, but it requires some faith in institutions who aren't
Yeah.
necessarily fast changing to really change the entirety of what they do. And this Ezra Klein episode was literally titled "We Need to Rethink the Purpose of Education." And Jonathan Haidt, who wrote The Anxious Generation and has become really popular. By the way, everyone should check out his earlier work, which was really great about values and across the political divide, and The Writer
Yes,
in the Yellow
righteous
Pages.
mind.
Yes, all that stuff, so good. But he described this moment as being different than the previous moments I was talking about with Google and even social media, because society is moving, as he says, from the idea that AI enables you to know everything, right? That was Google, to the idea that AI allows you, and the internet, to the idea that AI allows you to do everything, right? And his warning, just to play devil's advocate again, is AI agents are going to give us omnipotence, and that would be horrible for children. Now, it's
Yes.
not horrible if we can all be really invested in that vision you just described of how do we up level our education systems, the experiences that we're giving our kids as parents to make the most of these tools, and maybe focus less on the knowing, but the applying of what we're knowing, right? I think all this talk about like, you got to know how to be, there's roles to be a prompt engineers and things like that. It's like, I don't know how long that's going to be around for, right? Our kids are not going to be in the workforce for another 10 years. It's impossible to predict forward the actual skills that they're going to need with respect to AI. But in the meantime, how do we create experiences for them, including educationally, that allow them to harness the power and do more, right? We talked in an earlier episode about companies want to hire 1+1, somebody who knows how to use AI to get double the bang. How do we actually unleash kids' creativity, which declines every year that they get older, right? How do we unleash their productivity? And, I can see the world you're trying to paint, Jeremy. I just don't know if we're going to get there with our current institutions. Now, we can
Yes.
talk more at the end of this episode, WTF you can do about it, about what parents can actually do, and not just
Yeah.
depend on the schools to do that.
Yeah. Well, I want to throw down a question for you, Omar. I want to get your parenting advice here because I do think that for daughters like ours, and I suspect a lot of kids out there, the teachers and the report card are still the main driver of
Mm,
what they actually spend time on, at least as
hmm
far as it pertains to academic achievement.
hmm
And so I found that it's really frustrating because I try to challenge my daughters, hey, let's try to open a lemonade stand or let's sort of sell some stuff on Etsy or whatever. And they're totally unmotivated. Whereas, like, they'll walk through a brick wall for their teacher. Yet their teacher is asking so much less of them and such less interesting questions, at least from my perspective. Is there some way that we as parents can like up level the AI discourse for our kids, even if we can't control the education system?
Oh my God, what parent has not had that experience, right? You go into a parent teacher conference, it's like, your child is an angel and they work their ass off and they have great questions and they're the first to ask all the questions. And like my kid who's like watching YouTube on her iPad all day, like that's my kid,
Yes.
right? So it's like, um, so I think that that's a pretty common experience. I don't think it just applies to AI. I guess the question is AI a unique opportunity for us to show, like, I was thinking about laziness, right? Because my kid brought it up. And part of the reality of why humans are lazy is because we focus so much on the process to get something done, right? Like, I was just talking to my daughter, like, oh, I got to get up from this comfortable position I'm in with my iPad. It's the middle of the summer and I got to go eat lunch. And my dad is making me read a book instead of being on my iPad anymore, right? And it's all the effort. But if you think about the return, the outcome that you might
Yeah.
get from that effort, that can mitigate laziness, right? So it's like, oh, but you are really close to finishing that book, and that bagel I just got you is going to taste really good and you're going to have more energy, right? Think about the outcome. That's where I think maybe there's an opportunity, I don't know, to like push our kids, because now the barriers, because of the process barriers are lower, right? The process barriers are lower. It's less effort to perhaps not start that lemonade stand, but to know exactly how to do it, what you should price it at, what, how to, what the ingredients are, right? It's a lower barrier, and perhaps that's the thing that'll get our kids over the hump to embrace some of the, like, just doing without the attachment to the grade. But I agree, the grade is the motivating thing for so many kids. That's actually the definition of the passenger mode I was talking about earlier, is you're driven by that as an outcome as opposed to the learning as an outcome. And fundamentally, there's no substitute for trying to figure out, whether it's in a school or at home, how to get your kid fired up about something, right? They got to
Yeah.
be motivated. And that is a big question that's different for every kid.
Well, before we get into solution mode and try to solve our YouTube iPad challenges, let's at least make our prognostications here. So imagine now that it's 2030, our oldest daughters are now about to go to college or in college. What do we feel is the most likely outcome? Is it A, that the sort of utopian vision comes to be where everyone is able to do so much more because AI takes care of the grunt work and they are freed up to do really amazing, impactful things in the world? B, everyone is just skating by, cheating through everything, not really learning. An entire generation is stunted both academically and socially.
Living
Or
in
is there even
passenger
a
mode.
C? Yeah, with master mode. Or is there a C, something completely unforeseen? Let me just throw this out. 3 years ago, when AI first launched, I thought that AI was going to be a real boon for job seekers. It was going to help them find unique jobs off the beaten path. Everyone was going to find their perfect fit in the world. And yet, 3 years later, what is everyone using AI for? To cheat on their applications. So I'm a little cynical, but what's your take, Omar, of all those many potential paths?
I think it's become clear in this conversation that I'm also a little cynical. I think that, to your earlier question, I think, and every parent knows this, it's hard to get kids to embrace failure, which is inherent in learning, right? Whether you're learning academic content or about yourself or about the world, the entire process of childhood and growing up is about learning, right? And that's hard, tedious, internal work that is always easier, especially today with the tools we have, separate from AI, right? The devices, the content on demand. It's so much easier to be in passenger mode. And I think it's going to take all of us to do a fundamental rethink of how we're supporting, connecting, putting devices down, actually doing things without technology to get kids to grow, right? So I'm much more focused on the next 10 years instead of what happens at that 10-year mark, because I can't possibly know. But I know that we're all going to be fucked, and our kids are too, if they're not going through that really hard, the machinations of learning that that these tools are inherently, simplifying, right?
Yeah,
We all
yeah.
have the example of, like, writing the essay, right? And now people have gotten so sophisticated that they're putting it through multiple models and then taking the best of and putting it through a humanizer AI to throw in some typos and stuff. That is not a real skill. That's not really learning, right? So
Yeah.
I'm worried about kids cheating through life when it's so much easier to take the easy road. That's what I'm worried about. And I think we all have to be super on guard about it and super proactive. And we'll get to recommendations in a minute here. But if parents don't take that responsibility themselves, then you're going to lose your kids.
Yeah. Yeah. And so,
What do you choose, A, B, or C?
yeah, I hate to say it, but I think you're absolutely right. The education systems move really slowly. We as humans have evolved to conserve energy, which means being lazy instead of using our brains, which are very energy sort of high consumptive. And so, unfortunately, it does feel like we're skating towards that. But I do think for our conversation in the very first episode, the folks who succeed in the future, and they're not going to be everyone, unfortunately, will be those who are getting parented today. No pressure, Omar, to sort of be the best of both worlds, to understand AI and to be in that really powerful struggle that helps them solve future challenges. Okay, to that end,
Yeah.
let us now
Well, I
pivot.
want to bring up one
Yeah,
other
okay,
thing.
say one
I
more
want to
thought.
bring
Yeah.
up one other thing we haven't touched on. I wanted to bring up the topic of digital friends and bots,
Ooh, yes.
right? That was part of the dystopian vision that my daughter painted for me is we're all going to become friends with that thing and it's going to say bad things and it's going to replace our social relationships, which we actually need to be happy and thriving and learn about ourselves, right? So you might have seen some of the news in the last couple of weeks about the bots that Elon has put out in XAI,
Yeah.
right? Grok has these companions. One of them is a highly sexualized blonde anime bot named Annie, I think. And you can use that even in kids mode. And then there's a
Okay.
super sarcastic panda, Bad Rudy, right, who is like pretty graphic and vulgar. And the breaking news this week, I think, is like Elon has decided, okay, XAI is going to launch Baby Grok, which is a safe AI experience for younger users. This is the guy, by the way, who's been super doomsday about all of AI. And
Yeah,
now
and also
he's
like said that his like original child was dead to him, so clearly not parent of the
right.
year material.
Yeah, even though it is his personal mission to procreate as much as possible. So you've got these bots. This is going to be hard for grown-ups to resist. Now imagine the developing mind, right? Prefrontal cortex does not fully develop till 25, 26. For men, I saw it may not even be fully developed until age 42,
We're
right?
still working on it, Omar.
We're still working on it. How are kids going to possibly resist this? And are you worried about their friends being bots? Not just their friends, their counselors, their teachers, their coaches, maybe their therapists, their perhaps romantic partners. Is that part
Yeah.
of our future?
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly that's what they're pushing. Zuckerberg himself said loneliness is one of the biggest issues facing our society, which the Surgeon General also said. But
Yep.
he said the solution is not more in-person relationships, it's bots. And of course, he's talking his own book. He would love to sell you those bots, I'm sure. But the reality is that even if it's not 100% across the board today, it's certainly coming. So what do I think? It goes back to this parenting principle, which is that we've got to be there pushing our kids to do the hard thing, which means get out into the world, talk to real people, even if it's uncomfortable, and start to build up that social muscle that you can't just forge in the AI fires of ChatGPT. I mean, that's my 2 cents. What do you think, Omar?
Yeah, I do think a lot of this goes back to parenting. I also think, you've got to be just like we know now if you're going to give your kid a phone or any kind of connected device, you have to watch what they're doing. You probably shouldn't give them that device till eighth grade or high school if you can. You should be watching the apps that they put on there very closely. You got to do that now for their interactions with AI. And I will just say, when it comes to educational purposes, not all AI is created the same right now. Having spent a long time working in tech companies serving the education market, there's a difference in terms of how companies approach schools, right? Some of them view it as a market. It's just a market. Let's take the same product for general consumers and maybe offer it at a discount for education. And so we'll have to see how this all plays out with some of the big players. But I think there are some exciting products like Claude, like some of the AI tutoring products like Solvely, which has gotten millions of users, and a lot of good initial research about AI tutors, right? Imagine that the role of a teacher is changing to that AI tutor, every kid just bringing that into the classroom with them and knowing where they're at, right? But when you think about like Claude for education, new investments in teacher training that OpenAI and Microsoft and Claude and Anthropic are investing in, there's the potential to see some of these to actually create kid specific and school specific versions of these products that preserve critical thinking, that are really more coaches and almost teachers than just giving you the answer and allowing you to cheat or take those shortcuts. I would say like push your kids to use those kinds of things and be watching and hyper vigilant about when they're not doing that, right? When they're shortcutting for the answers. Jeremy,
Well said.
what do you think about that? And what other recommendations do
Yeah.
you have for
Well,
parents?
I think we've definitely gotten into that next stage of the journey here together, which is we've gone from WTF is going on to WTF you should do about it. In terms of what I would recommend, I'm going to say something a little bit spicy, which is so far you might get the idea that it's one of these all or nothing things where you say, okay, no phone, no social media, at least until you're 35. Whereas, at least for AI, because of my sort of optimistic hopes earlier, I think it's important to get kids exposed to it early. But instead of just throwing it in their laps, the way that we threw, Gen Z into smartphone ownership or threw them onto Instagram without any sort of supervision, we got to do it together. And like one thing I've been trying to do with my own girls is every time I discover something really cool on I don't just sort of like hide it away or, save it for something else. I bring them into the fold. I say, hey, what
Mm,
kind of crazy image could we generate now that they have an image generator on this? What if we could make a movie? What if we could do something like that? And it's not because they have to be using it all the time, but I want them to know it's possible. So as they think about those projects, those things they're really passionate about, they start to remove some of those limits that you and I might have assumed were just always going to be in place and say, hey, maybe there's some way I can scale that brick wall using the tools that my dad showed me. So I want to bring my kids into the fold from the earliest stages. What's your thought about that? Could that backfire, Omar?
mm, maybe, but I don't think so if you're right there with them, right? That's the
Yeah.
whole point of what we're trying to say. Be present as parents in this entire process. So I love that. And you're also not letting go of your responsibility to help them find their passions. This is just a way to nurture them again by lowering those barriers. Um, so I think that's really powerful. I think you may have convinced me not to fear it and to allow my child to play with it. I did do a super scientific poll on LinkedIn, and I asked this question, which is, what best describes your approach to parenting with AI? And the three options were: let my kids experiment away. Second option, play around with guardrails. The third was, I'm watching closely and skeptically. What do you think 100% of people chose?
I'm going to say people lied and said C, when in fact they're using it as a babysitter.
That would have been a lie, although that might describe me. No, everybody said they're letting their kids play around with guardrails, right?
Okay.
So then the question is, what should those guardrails be? How
Hmm.
present are you as a parent? And can you partner with some of the other adults in their lives, like teachers, to make sure they're applying the same guardrails?
This is interesting because I was thinking, like, in my experience, AI and social media are almost completely diametrically opposed from a kid's
Mm.
perspective. Even though we're talking about them kind of in the same breath, social media sucks you in. And even if the parents are not pushing it, if a kid is exposed to it, because of how we're wired as a species, that social catnip, that sort of addictive dopamine producing tendency, that's going to get them completely hooked. Whereas with AI, because it's a text interface, it's like AIM from like 1995 all over again. Look that up for all the Gen Z and Gen Alphas out there. It's almost inherently boring. Like we saw this at Khan Academy when I was there. We had to practically beg students to use our Conmigo AI tool because it wasn't visual like Instagram. It wasn't video like TikTok. And it certainly wasn't social in the same way. And so I actually feel like it's less about guardrails with AI, like, oh, my kid's going to go off and have an illicit chat, and more like, hey, let me show you why this is really cool and exciting and some of the things that are possible for you. But maybe you've seen some darker sides, Omar.
Well, first of all, it's not just text-based, right? That is ultimately how these things are working, is completing the sentence. But these bots are pretty good and alluring, and they're only going to get way, way better, right? And I'm not just talking about the Grok AI bots. I'm talking about like the basic stuff in ChatGPT.
Yeah.
You know, my wife has her chat. She has conversations with ChatGPT all day long, and it's like the very
Wait, are
deep
you
voice.
jealous, Omar?
Yes, I am.
Uh,
It's the very deep voice guy on there who's like, "Oh, let me help you with that performance review, baby." It's like, why do we need to sexualize that? But I think those are only going to get better, and I don't think we can just extrapolate out into the future that there's no video interface, for example, right? I mean,
that's
there
true.
there
That's
already
true.
sort of is. Um, so so I don't know, but And you're right. Maybe guardrails is the wrong word. But do you have any thoughts on how we can be on the same page as all the responsible adults in our kids' lives, or is this going to be a truly DIY, choose your own adventure? Every kid is doing it different type of thing. Because I will tell you, as soon as my kids' friends started getting phones, it became infinitely harder for me to say, no, you're not getting one, right? It
Yeah,
helps so
yeah,
much if there's this peer pressure, including from the parents and the teachers. To your earlier point, our
yeah.
kids will go through brick walls for their teachers, but rarely listen to us.
It's like they'll go through titanium walls for their friends.
Titanium,
And
right?
so, yeah, here's the interesting thought. I think that obviously social media is a complete nightmare. Like the idea that we just allowed kids to go onto that at
Disaster.
age 7 or whatever. I mean, I did some pretty crazy stuff on AIM back in the day, but again, there were inherent guardrails on what you could do on a chat room. But I think about the social component of a phone with your friends versus random weird strangers on the internet. And I kind of like the idea of like our daughters going out there, texting, learning about what it's like to text responsibly, to get your feelings hurt. How do you bounce back from that? And then this is interesting. Could AI almost be like a third party, like a Switzerland in the parent child technology relationship that helps them sort through these things? Like if you get a text message and you're not sure, like, hey, what does this emoji mean? Or what does that mean for me? Like AI could help you think of a way to respond gracefully and diplomatically before like, burning bridges with your BFF or something like that. Is that possible?
I'm so inspired by your use of AI and your myriad ways of integrating it into the parenting experience. I am gonna go try some of these things. I think it's an interesting reframe for me to think about AI as co-parent as opposed to something to fear. But I would say my principal concern is the ability to just take shortcuts through life, specifically in the educational context. I worry a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit about this idea that we're all going to have digital friends that we're closer to than our actual friends. But, again, this is on all of us to remind our kids that there's much more out there in the world and that it isn't this really powerful customized technology that can not just do all the things, but befriend. And by the way, another element of all of this that I think makes it really hard for kids to resist is just how like servile these bots have become, right? They're
Yes.
so reinforcing. You asked such a
Right.
great question.
Especially when your real life friends are not nearly as servile. You're going to say,
Right.
hey, I choose my AI friend.
Right. Why would you not choose an AI friend, right? Who's like always going to be there for you, understands your history because they're analyzing it constantly from your past conversations, right? So like, and maybe it's not all going to turn out like the Joaquin Phoenix movie from 15 years ago, right? Maybe it's going to be like, to your point, it's going to be additive, it's going to be supplemental. They will consult these tools to figure out how better to navigate real world situations, including relationships and friendships. But right now, I think it's hard to know. Jury's out. But if you take one piece of advice from today's episode, it's go experiment with how AI can not just be Switzerland, but perhaps accretive to your dynamic with your kids in this very unpredictable world that they're going into. And don't outsource that responsibility to other adults like your kid's school, right? Teachers, schools, school systems, they're completely overwhelmed right now. They already were. Now you're throwing this into the mix and it's impossible for them to navigate. There's going to be some really exciting models that come to the fore, but it is entirely insufficient to say, okay, you go solve this. It's your job. Just like previous ways of technology, you got to really watch what's going on would be my advice. And Jeremy, I bet your advice, and you can wrap us up, is don't just watch, engage,
I'll
right?
say, build a bot to watch over your kids for you. Yes.
And I love
No,
that idea
absolutely. Yeah.
of like we fear that which we don't know, right? So bring
Yeah.
your kids into knowing it with you,
Yeah.
and maybe some of that will go away.
Go on this journey together. Um, okay. So that being said, I think we owe it to our listeners to come back a year from now, Omar, to see how things have changed, if we have new advice. But what I encourage everyone to do is please, please, please follow us on your favorite podcast app. And most importantly, leave a review because that's how other folks can find us. Until next time, this is Omar and Jeremy, and this is WTF is Up.